the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to have Roger Smith with us. Roger, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
So I am professionally a research scientist in robotic surgery. And we study how the robots work and how surgeons get good at using them. And that led to my fiction writing, which is how these robots might evolve, what they might be like 25 years from now. And then once you have these robots, what capabilities do they have? And now, of course, how does AI support them? That's got to be a topic. And what impact do they have on the surgeons that they're partners with and the healthcare systems that they're part of and society in general? So it's kind of a cast forward from what I do today to, or professionally, to what it might be like for the next generation of people that are doing this kind of thing.
When did you start writing your novels?
I started writing novels just a little over 2 years ago. Yeah, prior to that, my profession was kind of all-consuming, and I wrote nonfiction that was about the profession, about the technology, about business, things like that. And about 2 years ago, I became a consultant and stepped back from, 9 to 5, 8 to 6, those kind of hours. And I had time to think a little more. And so I said, the one thing I've never done is write fiction. I've read lots of fiction, but I never tried to write it. And so that's when I started trying to write fiction and turning what I knew professionally into something that was speculative fiction, what seemed like the natural thing. I had also been speaking at medical conferences, and they love to hear about what might be coming in the future. And since I was not a medical doctor, but a computer science doctor, they wanted to hear, well, what do you think the technology will be? And so instead of saying, this is what might happen, when writing fiction, I was able to say, this is what exists now. And now what impact is it going to have?
All right. So 2 years ago, when you started, the world has changed a little bit. So with the advance of ChatGPT and its popularity, I mean, I know AI has been around for a lot longer than that, but
yeah,
ChatGPT, when it came on the scene, has it advanced your fiction? Okay, I'm going to rephrase that. Has what you imagined started to come true a little faster?
Yes, hugely faster. So when I started the first novel, GPT wasn't out yet. And I was enough into computer science that I knew how to program some of the AIs, but society couldn't use it. Normal people couldn't use it. And I was finished with the first novel and in the final edits and the cover design and all of that when they released ChatGPT. And so roughly at the same time, I'm getting exposed to it like everybody else and realizing that in the back rooms of all these high-tech companies in Silicon Valley, they had made some huge leaps. And I was like, oh my gosh, what I said the AI would be like 25 years from now I'm like, that kind of AI will probably be with us in 5 years, maybe sooner. And so I was like, well, I've already put a stake in the ground for where I think this AI is going to emerge. It's really hard to unwrite that. And so my novels speculate on what AI would be like in 25 years, though it might be 5 years. So now I've just, in the second novel and third novel, I've just tried to bump up the capability more instead of rewrite the past, to bump it up and go, okay, it's more aggressive than it was in the first novel.
That's absolutely fascinating. So robotic surgeries are, how does that work? Explain what a robotic surgery is.
Okay, so a surgeon, in surgery, the world kind of divides surgeries into three different modalities. There's open surgery, which is how I had an appendectomy decades ago, where they cut a slit in you and reach in with instruments and their fingers and fix something. And then there's laparoscopic surgery, which was called keyhole surgery, where they cut little small incisions that are a quarter of an inch, maybe half an inch, and they insert a camera and instruments. And then robotic surgery, the instruments go in through the same quarter-inch incisions, but on the back end, instead of a surgeon's hands holding the controls, they're attached to a robot. And then the surgeon sits at a separate console where he or she moves their hands, and those instruments inside move in exactly the same way. And it sounds like, well, is it just the same as laparoscopic surgery? It makes a couple of changes. One is there is something called the fulcrum effect in laparoscopic surgery. So if you're holding the back end of a shaft, you move your hand down, the tip of the instrument down inside the body is going to move up. And all laparoscopic surgeons spent many, many procedures mentally adjusting for that. Well, when they built the robotic control, they said, let's stop all that. Let's make the instruments move exactly the way the surgeon's hands move so that it's more natural. And then the cameras also magnify everything 3, 5, 7 times. So what is really, really small in the body looks much bigger, and you can operate with more precision. And so robotic surgery started assisting in a big way with prostatectomies in men and hysterectomies in women. And now if you go to have either one of those procedures, your surgeon, especially in any large hospital, is probably going to suggest that they do it robotically. It's that common.
So will these robots take over and become our healthcare providers?
So to some degree, I think so. There's another robot that's used for hip and knee replacement surgery, and it's kind of gruesome. But when they do a hip or knee replacement, they have to cut away the head of the bone that they're going to replace with an implant. And you can build a 3D model inside the robot's memory and tell it where all the bones are and tell it exactly where you, the human surgeon, plan to cut and where you plan to drill a hole. And then when you're doing the surgery, that robot forces the human hand to do the plan exactly like it was programmed. So you, the surgeon, can't sneeze and make a mistake or have a trembly hand that day and make the hole too big. It's impossible. That robot could already do all that cutting and drilling by itself. But the company that makes it doesn't enable that feature because surgeons aren't ready to give up that level of control. Patients are not comfortable being told the robot's going to do all the cutting. And probably insurance companies and lawyers aren't ready to go, who's liable if we let that happen? So in some areas, the capabilities already here with us. We as society just have to be prepared to turn it on.
I imagine that that's where your books go. We just
That
turn it on, and all of a sudden the robots are intelligent beings that are maybe taking over the world.
that's true. I give, as we said about ChatGPT and accelerating the intelligence, I give these robots this AI that's at least as good as the human surgeons. And then part of the story is the human impact on surgeons. Now, right now, everybody's asking the question, is ChatGPT going to replace my job and I'm going to be fired? Well, it's the same question, only for the elite, for the surgeons that are at the top of the pyramid of physicians. And these surgeons who've always been very respected, they've had a lot of clout in the healthcare system. They get what they want. They're seeing some of that taken away by the AI that can run a robot as well as they can. And they're having this identity crisis over, well, who am I if a robot can do everything that I can do? Yeah, that's the kind of thing that happens in the novels.
Well, that is fascinating. I am not sure that I'm ready for the future.
Yeah,
As an English teacher, as an English professor, I deal with ChatGPT and artificial intelligence all the time. Although I will say that the students, they get the fact that artificial intelligence isn't quite as good as a human right now.
Oh, good.
Like
Okay.
their ideas aren't quite spoken properly. That
Hmm.
it's they get that it's not the quality that they would like to turn in. So I'd like to think that that's because they want to impress me. It may or may not be, but that's
Yeah.
I'm gonna stick with that. I'm gonna stick with that idea. They want to impress me.
They, I don't know. I think that, but they're right. I don't know whether they're just trying to impress you, but they're right. It doesn't write that well.
It might someday, but right now
Yeah.
it doesn't. So that's we'll stick with that. And I imagine so tell me about okay, I understand the concept of your books. Is there a particular character arc, one particular doctor that you're following? How does this is it like one particular robot you're following? How does this work?
Yeah. It's a kind of a trio. There's a doctor, a robot, and a specific AI. And in the first novel, the doctor is still in her fellowship, which is what happens right after residency. So she's young and she's still learning, and the AI is teaching her the skills that she needs to be as good as her mentor. And at the same time, the mentor, who's older and established and well known, he's wrestling with losing his identity to this AI controlled robot. So he is resenting the AI while she is kind of loving it and what it's doing for her. And then through the three novels, she graduates and becomes a practitioner or an attending physician at a hospital. And she wants to bring the robot and AI with her and be partners with them, be very aggressive at including it in her practice. And we see how that conflicts with the established healthcare system. So she's growing up. And then finally in the third, it's not finally, it's where I am now. In the third novel, she's so good at working with the robot that during a military conflict, a war, the military calls on her to come and help them because they're doing surgery from Europe onto to soldiers on the battlefield. And the AI can help her with that. And they want her because she's so good. So she keeps getting more mature and getting herself into bigger problems each novel.
That is so interesting. And so anyway, there ends up being a political conflict, I assume, that you've been able to bring in.
Yeah, I this it doesn't sound too original, but it's Russia's invasion of Finland. So Finland is a neighbor of Russia, just like the Ukraine is. And it turns out historically, Russia has been an invader of Finland in the past. And Finland has gained their independence and has had different levels of Russian influence in their country. And so I just kind of revised that as the battlefield scenario for this novel.
So Roger, tell me about your writing process.
Yeah. So when I started, there was no chat GPT. So I'm writing in the traditional way. And since it's my first novel, I'm reading lots of books about the craft of writing. We're reading, of course, The Artist's Way and Save the Cat and a whole bunch of others, trying to figure out how to do this well. So I was learning the process. And then and therefore I developed my own voice, what I think a story should sound like, how much dialogue versus descriptive text should be in there, how I like to open chapters, a lot of things like that developed during the first novel. Then ChatGPT came out, and I'm in a number of Facebook groups where we discuss this. And as you know, there's two sides, and it's probably more divisive than politics right now. The people who embrace AI are all about, look what I can do this and this. And there's another camp that totally abhors anything that AI touches. And so as a technologist, of course, I'm experimenting with it, but I'm not talking about it because I'm afraid of the blowback that I would get. Um, and That's been about a year now. So as that year evolved, I experimented with using GPT and Claude in writing text. And I found out some of the things that your students are finding out. Um, it writes in I originally called it's very aggressive. Everything has to be grandiose. It likes to throw in really big adjectives and adverbs, and each sentence is just as great as the last one. There is no ebb and flow. There is no climbing and then dropping. It's always climbing or always at the peak. And I'm like, calm down. Like writing if you've had too much caffeine. So I discovered that and I was like, okay, I'm constantly having to tone it down to something that's more realistic. The other thing that I found is that it is, in my opinion, really, really bad at writing dialogue. It writes descriptive text pretty well, walking through a dark, scary, crunching leaves under the feet and shadows. And it does that pretty well. But anytime it writes dialogue, I never like it. I always think that is just too stilted. That's not how people talk. Um, it just doesn't work. And so I was fixing that, and I was like, I can't, it's just so hard to use. Um, but I also noticed because I was experimenting with it, I tried lots of different things. So here's for one of my short stories, here's what I did. I sat down and I wrote the whole short story myself. And then I gave it to my editor and I had her correct it and give it back and I revised the whole process that we traditionally do. And then I came up with a finished short story. And it was only like 20,000 words. Then I took that 20,000 words backwards and in 1,000 word chunks, because that's all GPT can work with very well, I said, rewrite this. Various ways of rewriting it. But I let GPT rewrite the entire story, 20 different chunks at a time or sequentially. And then I put those 20 sections together. They're almost chapters and gave it to my editor. And I said, I want you to edit this, but don't try to take it back to my original story. Let the AI write what it wants to write. Just make sure it's clean and correct and all of that. So then we produced the AI's version of the exact same story. And I bound the two of them together and published it as an ebook with both stories in there. So that was one experiment. And I wish I had more feedback to report, well, what did people think? I didn't get
That
any
is
feedback about the AI piece. So, I'm still getting the thumbs up here and like normal.
that's really an interesting way to approach both your subject of AI and robots as well as the writing genre in general. So just being able to see what it can do. Roger Smith, how can people get in touch with you? How can they find your books, learn more about you?
So I prefer my author website is rddsmith.com. That's the name I publish fiction under, uh, primarily because I could get the domain name and nobody else was using that in Amazon.
Always important. Have your
Yeah,
own
yeah,
identity.
that's right.
I was fortunate to get Alison Nissen so often. So
Probably the single L in the beginning it helped with that.
there is another Alison Nissen who is a professor, by the way.
Oh,
And it's spelled the same way, but I got there first. So
yeah.
domain name is mine. And I won't give it up.
No, hang on to that. That's gold.
Right. Well, Roger, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Yes, I'm ready.
Do you have a favorite t-shirt?
I do have a favorite t-shirt. It on the front, it says World's Toughest Mudder, 2022, I think. That's an obstacle course race that I do every year. It happens different places. Last year it was in Texas. This year it's in Florida. and you run this 5-mile obstacle course around and around and around as many times as you can in 24 hours. And when you get too tired to go around, you have a tent set up and you go crash in your tent until you can go again. You get up and go again. So that's my favorite t-shirt. Most people, when I wear it in public, they'd pay no attention, but I know what's going on with that shirt.
That's quite a challenge.
It's crazy.
I like my bedtime too much. I don't think I could do that. Would you rather visit the ocean or a lake?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'd rather visit a lake. Since I live in Florida, I get exposure to the ocean anytime I want. But I grew up in Colorado, and so a really clean lake in a mountainous environment with green trees around it, maybe a path around, is really attractive and something that I miss. So I think that the lake is just much more picturesque to me now that I can't get to it so often.
Final question. Do you pay attention to your horoscope?
No, I do not. I don't pay attention to my horoscope, but I have been working through things like Clifton Strengths Finder and Enneagrams. And it did occur to me that aren't those kind of like horoscopes in some way? And I'm sure the founders don't think so, but it occurred to me that they might be.
You know, I was actually going to ask if you have taken any personality tests.
Uh-huh.
So you answered both questions. Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, Roger Smith, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Woo! We're all done.
Well, that was fun. You're really good at this.
Dr. Roger Smith has over 30 years of experience creating new technology solutions for large organizations. He holds 2 doctoral degrees and 3 master's degrees that span business, computer science, and mathematics. He is currently writing fiction that explores advanced medical devices, applications of AI, and new forms of simulation in the future. These describe the technology, but more importantly, they speculate on the impacts these might have on surgeons, patients, and the healthcare system, as well as society. For more information about Dr. Roger Smith, visit him online at rddsmith.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us at floridawriters.org. Until next time.